In our last video, we explored the structure and layout for a single page scrolling website with 3 sections of content. Except we're just jumping down to that content, and scrolling from one thing to the next doesn't always leave us in the exact right spot. And there's some CSS properties that will improve upon that. So let's explore things such as scroll behavior and scroll snap. Let's start with scroll behavior. It can be really off-putting and jarring to click on a section and just jump to that section and not really realize where you are within the flow. Can I even tell that I'm on the sort of last part of the page? Do I think I'm going to a brand new page? It's a little bit difficult for the user to have that sense of context. So it would make more sense if we click on this for the browser simply to scroll there to give us that sense of place and context. And so a lot of developers worked with JavaScript to enable that type of animated behavior where you could animate to a particular section. But you no longer need to use JavaScript for that. There is a CSS property called scroll behavior that's available. Looking up scroll behavior in the Can I Use website to see for browser compatibility, you can see that this is rolled out relatively recently. In the Edge browser, it was released around 2020. In Safari, maybe about 2022. And so it now has full support in the major browsers. And so at this point, we can go ahead and use scroll behavior and not necessarily have to worry about a JavaScript solution. Let's go ahead and apply that to our page. To do that, the easiest way is simply to target the HTML container itself. And we're going to use a property called scroll behavior. There's only 2 options for scroll behavior: auto, which is the current default, which is the jump to section, where it will just jump to your page, or there's the option for smooth scrolling. And so once we enable the option for smooth scrolling, and I save that, refresh my browser over here, you'll see that I can click on a section and it's going to animate to that particular section. Now we really can't control the animation speed, but it's a nice smooth scrolling behavior. If you had to control the speed, you'd have to choose a JavaScript solution. But the speed is pretty snappy and you get that sense of context of what's happening. Oh yes, I can see I'm scrolling on the page going to a particular section. It's nifty, it's nice, it's great for single page scrollers. So you can always add that on the HTML tag. Now, you can do that within individual sections as well. So you might not have that on the overall individual, on the overall HTML. Another place I could have put this is on any kind of containing element, or your scroll container basically. So I have a container on the whole page. And so another thing I could have done instead of actually addressing the HTML would be to actually target that container and give it the scroll behavior. So I'm going to go ahead and take it off the HTML and place that right there. That would be another place that I could have done that. And so if you had any scrolling that wasn't maybe full page or within particular containers, you could also do it this way and tell the behavior there to scroll. So we could target the scroll container as a way of doing that. Refresh over here, and then right now I'm just jumping to these sections as well. But what we'll need to do is make sure that we add a couple other things. So on your scroll container, you want to make sure that the overflow on the direction that you want it is going to be set to scroll. So I want to be able to scroll to my overflow. And I'm going to give that container a specific height so it has some overflow as well. So then I'll choose scroll behavior smooth as the scroll behavior. I'll save that out, refresh over here. And now in this particular case, I should be able to then animate down to the particular sections that have my content. So if you wanted to do that on a container instead of the HTML itself, that would be another way to enable this type of behavior. Cool. Okay, another new CSS property that's going to be useful here is our scroll snap property. So let's say I don't use the navigation here and I just start scrolling down the page. Well, in that particular case, as I'm scrolling down the page, I might just leave it in the wrong spot. Like the way that this works is I really want my content to take up the full screen and not necessarily see other stuff above and below. And so that can get a little difficult to potentially like get to the right spot and leave it at the right spot. But there's something called a scroll snap behavior that will snap to the right locations so that you don't have these sort of accidentally sort of miss or go to the wrong location if you're scrolling up and down. Let's explore that. We'll be using a CSS property called scroll snap type, which also has some good browser support currently. So let's go ahead and take a look at implementing that inside of our design. You'll be adding the scroll snap type to your scrolling container. And what we want to do is go ahead and, so whatever the parent is here, so we're going to add scroll snap type. And then there's really some properties here that we can set. So first would be the axis that we want. Is it the x-axis, the y-axis, the block or inline axis? And then whether or not the scroll type is mandatory or by proximity. And so I'm scrolling along the y-axis, and I'm going to go ahead and say that I want this by proximity. And we'll look at what the difference might be. So I'm going to say by proximity. So I'll be scrolling on Y, and we want the snap to be that sort of section that's close to, it will snap to like the closest section basically when it's done by proximity. And then the other thing that we can do here is set a alignment for the child objects. So those are my sections that I'm actually snapping to. And so those particular sections, what we can do is add a scroll snap align option. So I'm going to say scroll snap align. And what we could do is tell this to align to the start of the section, to the center part of the section, or to the end of the section. So I'm going to say we want it to align at the start of the section. And we'll explore some of these sort of other options for that. Okay, so that's it. We've just got to make sure that our container has a scroll snap type, the access and the type of, whether it's mandatory or by proximity, and then setting some of the children to align, to the start or to the center, or where do you want them to snap, or to the end. With those two things in play, I can save my file and refresh my browser over here to test this out. And now I can still jump to these sections, but if I'm scrolling manually, and so I'm using my scroll wheel, for example, you'll notice that it'll sort of snap down to that section. Like I'll scroll and then it'll kind of snap into place. I don't know if you can really tell this or not, but as I get close to a section, it's going to snap to that section. It actually doesn't let me just have a little bit of it. It's going to snap to where that section is. And this is by proximity. So you can see the one that has more of it kind of snaps in. And once I get a little bit more of this other one, it will snap up. And so as I'm scrolling, it kind of snaps to these particular sections. You can kind of get your scroll in the middle where you don't have a lot of proximity to one or the other, so it still lets you do that. But as you get close, it just sort of snaps into place once you let go, and it sort of allows the user to be imprecise in that sense. If I changed my CSS from proximity to mandatory as the other sort of value, and I save that back out, then even the proximity part wouldn't work. It forces it to a particular section. So I'm going to refresh here, and as I'm scrolling down the page, it forces it into a section. Not even like, I can't sort of even have anything that's in between. It's one or the other, no matter what. So if it's mandatory, it forces you into a particular section at the moment you let go. You never even really get that sense of proximity. I think proximity is a little bit nicer, I think, because it respects some of the users' desire a little bit more. Like it makes it where if they get close, and I'm going to refresh here, if they get close to a particular section, it will snap into place, but it still allows them to like release and not automatically go up or down, when they do that. So kind of, I think, respects the user a little bit more in some ways to use proximity, but it's a nice behavior that we get that scroll type. So let's explore a couple other things. Let's say that we had some sections like this middle section, section 2, and it didn't take up the full screen. I'm going to target section 2 specifically and give it a different width or height than the other one. So we'll say that the height of section 2 is actually only 50 VH, and I'm going to save that out. And let's go ahead and save and refresh our browser. And when we're on section 2, it should only take up sort of half of the height. That would be the idea here. Let's make sure that actually plays out and becomes true, whereas section 2 doesn't have quite as much height. And it wasn't working for me initially because instead of setting height, I used min height so that we could have overflow. And I need to match that over here. So I'll say that the height is 50, but the min height is also going to be 50 so that we can override this other property, which was making the section's minimum height always be 100 viewport units in height, right? So I need those to be in line. That's why that didn't work initially. And so now if I save and I refresh over here, we can see that that middle section is only sort of half the height that these other ones might be. And once I've got that, if we click to go to that section, you'll notice that it's aligning at the top because we're telling this alignment and the snap of that alignment to be towards the start. So the actual CSS here that we added was scroll snap start. If we change that to scroll snap center, then that would take these pieces and bring them more to the center. I'm going to save that and refresh. And now if I scroll to section 2, you'll see that it actually adds it to the center part rather than bringing it all the way to the top. And that's true with if I'm grabbing the scroll bar and I let go, we'll get that sort of proximity scrolling where it will make that go to the center. Now I can still, go to these other sections, but as I get that close, it's going to sort of center that particular content. Now, if I wanted these other two to be at the top, but that one to the center, I could certainly do that, where the way that I'd do that is I'd have these other ones aligned to the start, but specifically that particular content, I could override it through a more specific ID or class that might be on there and tell these to be different. Maybe I want it to be more at the end in terms of its alignment. If I save that out, refresh over here, and we start scrolling down, it will actually bring my browser back down so that that's at the end. We can scroll up, and then we'll scroll to section 2. By default, the scroll behavior brings your ID all the way up. So now it's kind of bringing it all the way up to the top. But as I scroll, it's going to actually snap it to the end. So that's like in this sense, we're getting this kind of in-between behavior there that I don't love as much. But we can sort of override with the child the individual settings here and make that scroll snap align to the center, which kind of keeps this a little bit more snapped in. And it also sort of works a little bit better with the navigation here as I'm clicking section to section. All right, so we can try these different behaviors out and kind of see what they're getting us. But scroll snap align and scroll snap type are pretty cool behaviors. Now, if we were scrolling on the x-axis, we'd need to change that to x, but something for you to explore. Now as I'm scrolling, the other thing that I'm noticing is that my images are all scrolling too. And we might want to have a parallax effect with those images where they're more fixed in place. And so that can be really interesting as a way of having our content go. So what we could do is come to any sections where we wanted that and ask our background attachment to be fixed. And in that case, that image will be sort of fixed into the background position here. And so I could save that out, refresh, and as I'm scrolling, you'll see that the image itself is now fixed, and these other images are rolling kind of over it. So that's kind of an interesting behavior. I'm going to do that both on the first section as well as section 3. And so when I save this out and we refresh over here, as I scroll the page, we can kind of see this different behavior. It's almost like this one section is rolling over these other two, and then that sort of behavior sort of reveals content. But it's kind of interesting in terms of that sort of parallax sense of scrolling rather than having all the images scroll. And so the only one that's not doing that right now is that center one, just to kind of have a difference in behavior for each of these. We could have them all have fixed backgrounds. One thing about fixed backgrounds is that once you choose to have a background attachment of fixed, it's sort of using the background of more of the root element. So even if I had sort of small images inside, and let's say I did this a little bit differently in section 2, I'm going to make the height of that a little bit taller. Let's say we did like 80 in VH, so it's a little bit taller. And then inside section 2, I'm going to add some imagery. Maybe instead of so much text, I'll have less text, but then I'll have some images underneath there. And so what I'm going to do is just go ahead and add some figures, maybe 3 figures. Let's put a container in there. Let's say just as an example, let's say I had an article container with 3 figures inside of it, and I'll put some images in those figures that are there. I'll just label these 1, 2, and 3. And what I'm going to do is go to my CSS here, and we'll tell those figures to have a background image to them. So I'm going to say figure, we'll give it a height. Let's say they had a width and height, width of 200 pixels and a height of 200 pixels, just as an example. And we'll give it a background image. Let's see, the images that I might want here are any of these, I guess. I'm going to go ahead and choose this one from Unsplash. And let's see what we're getting now. I'm going to save that out and just do a little refresh where that center section, I've got these 3 images that are there. I'd like them to align maybe to different places. So what we could do is have them, what I'll do is sort of make them line up. So I'm going to take the article container that I put them in and have it display as flex. So the default alignment should be in a row for those once we get that, so that they should sort of line up in a row. There they go. There's 1, 2, and 3 in a row. And then the figures themselves, what we might do is adjust the sort of background size. We could tell it to cover, for example, and if we refresh that over here, that might show more of the images that are there. Now, the moment we choose this and we could readjust the positioning of this too if we wanted to, so where this is displaying from, so if we wanted them in a different sort of positions or whatever and locations, maybe I want to see more on the left or right, we could adjust our backgrounds in terms of their position. So let's say I was really wanting to see like the sort of bottom right of this. I'm going to say bottom right. And when we do that and we refresh over here, we might be seeing kind of a different piece of this potentially.